بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم جميعا. We would like to introduce today our guest speaker, David Chaudron from the founder of Organized Change Consultancy. Hi, David.
Okay. Thank you. Is that I've had the pleasure of going back and forth between the United States and the Middle East since 1993. It has been an honor and a pleasure to be helping a number of different companies in your region. And I thank Ashraf and Mohandas Mohammed for inviting me to be speaking. And I'm looking forward to giving this presentation and also speaking and listening to you as we go on through it. I need to be very clear in that, and I apologize, I only know a little bit of Arabic, and so if you have some questions that are in Arabic, I know that Ashraf and Mohammed will be more than glad to be translating them. Also, that it's also important to realize that I will be waiting for questions after each slide rather than waiting till the very end, as these concepts can be rather complicated. And as a result of that, it's not good to be piling all up the questions at the very end. So in that particular case, again, I want to thank you, and we'll go ahead and start the presentation. One of the things what I have found in my over 30 years of experience as a management consultant is that very oftentimes that when people are looking at the situation in their own organizations, whether they be an employee or the head of it or managing director of it, that so oftentimes they are really only looking at part of the problem and not all of the problem. And as a result of that, they can come up with a very fragmented view about what is happening, and as a result, perhaps do the wrong things or the inappropriate things is what would be necessary to make them change. And I'm sorry to say is that very oftentimes management consultants like me have a problem and a tendency to be making this worse, because as a result of marketing and so on, we have to be putting our own special spin on things. And so what we try to do, we try to make our and everyone else's proportions of work different from everyone else. And so that can really add to a lot of confusion by clients, because many consultants may be coming to them, and to be honest with you, they really are trying to do the same thing, but they put slightly different spins on it. And as a result of that, the client is a little bit confused about what exactly is going to be done into their organization. So in light of that, let me help you here with a graph. And is what you very well may have experienced, that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different management techniques that can be used to help organizations. And part of the problem, however, is that they are often misapplied. Sometimes a particular management technique can be used in one location and one circumstance. And as a result of that, what can happen is people think it's successful anywhere and everywhere. And as a consequence to that, what can happen is misappropriations of time and effort and money. And unfortunately, what can actually occur is that maybe an organization may be using a tank to cut grass, and maybe using a pair of scissors to try to knock down a wall. And so because of this is the kind of a graph that will hopefully illustrate to you in part about on how you should be looking at problems, and also in terms of what kind of terms and techniques are going to be necessary to do. So if you look at this particular graph here, is that you will notice is that there are two dimensions to this graph. And that the one dimension to this graph is the severity of the problem. That's on the x-axis. And as you can see that on the lower left-hand side, the small severity problems are such things that maybe you can be hiring some people or firing some people, you may be training some people and the like, and that's all well going to be fine. Sorry. And as a consequence to that is that that's well and fine. However, if the problems are quite severe, there may be other things that may be necessary to do in an organization. And this is where the other dimension comes in, and that is the extent of the problem. If you have a problem that is relatively small and not very severe, and it really only affects a few people, you might want to think about doing something like coaching or counseling, maybe some training, and then if necessary, laying them off. On the other hand, you may have circumstances where the problem is quite severe, and in addition to that, it basically affects the entire organization. And that would be in the upper right-hand quadrant of this graph. In that particular case, simply hiring a few people, training a few people, giving some feedback to some people on their management style really is not going to be very effective in terms of what really needs to be done. And as a result of that, organizations can be spending lots of time and money doing things that in reality are not really going to be fully affecting the organization as a whole. To be making these particular kind of changes, this kind of assessment really needs to be done. And I think it's been quite obvious over the last 3 or 4 months or so that there are situations that will affect the entire organization and come as a complete surprise. And I think, as you know, we're referring to the COVID-19 pandemic and its massive disruption, not only in terms of the deaths of people, but also in terms of the economic effects. And this obviously is a situation where the severity of the problem is high, and there's the problem that comes across the entire organization. I'm getting some music in the background. Thank you. And certainly the COVID-19 issue certainly is a case that really has affected lots and lots of people, not only in your own organization, but naturally across the entire world. So in this particular case, what this suggests is that you may have to be doing something qualitatively different when you have problems that cut across the entire organization and are severe problems, compared to what you might do if their problems are only modest in nature and 1 or 2 people are affected. Let me give an example. So oftentimes what organizations do as parting into this is putting in what's called Six Sigma or Lean Six Sigma. And Lean Six Sigma is a very important set of techniques. It is a very powerful set of techniques if implemented properly. However, it really is only designed to be making things more efficient of what you are already doing. As a consequence to that, if you have all of your suppliers are going away, and if you have all of your customers are changing what they need, Six Sigma, Lean Six Sigma at the moment is probably not a good technique to be using. On the other hand, if you have highly severe problems that on the one hand that may be significantly changing the entire organization as a whole, for example, that you may be putting in a new ERP system, you may undergo restructuring, is that you may be moving the company from one particular location to another particular location. Those are those kind of changes that can be used when the problems are modestly severe and affects a part to a whole of the organization. You have another category of interventions that can be done, and that is where, again, in the upper right-hand side, where the severity of the problem is high and the extent of the problem is high. And in that particular case, you may need to be doing strategic planning. You may need to be focusing on entirely different markets. And you also probably really should be doing scenario planning to be looking at alternative futures about what actually might be occurring. The way that we have organized these are basically into levels. And the kind of level 4 changes is an example for Lean Six Sigma is what we call level 4. And that is they're making modest changes to an organization over time, making things incrementally improve. What we call level 3 changes are things like reorganization. Level 1 and 2 changes are what would normally be called strategic planning and scenario planning. And so based upon these right here, this is on how you can begin to understand on what kind of management techniques might be useful to your organization. And I'm going to be quiet just for a moment here. And as I said, after each slide is that I'll be waiting for questions. And then based upon that, answer those particular kind of questions. And if you will type them in the live comments section, StreamYard, and then I'll be glad to answer those and have a discussion with those. And then we can go on to the next slide.
May I ask a question now?
Please.
Okay. As I understand now from you that since we have problems across the organization, and as drawn here in the chart that we have 3 circles, so we have here, firstly, we have a challenge that to know that the problem affects the problem we face affects a specific area or the whole organization. And what about the severity of the problem? Now, so we know exactly the location of the problem in, let's say, in the first circle or second circle or third circle. As I understand from you now that we have a number of techniques or management methods are there in each circle. So the first challenge to know that we are in the middle circle, for example, and now we have a number of management methods and techniques that can be applied in our case. This is the right understanding, Dr. David?
Yes, Mohammed, that's exactly right. And it's really important to conduct a thorough assessment about what is going on in your organization, so you can probably identify where in this particular graph your organization is. Just as Mohammed said, is that it is very important to be looking at this, because I have seen so often, it's almost I despair about on how often that I have seen organizations put in a massive amount of work and time and money into doing something that really will not solve the issues what they have. And that I have been part of those when I was much younger, and I've hopefully will be learning from those organizations' mistakes in doing so. They give one very bad example. That one particular part of an organization was putting in process improvement, was putting in Lean Six Sigma. And this was actually in a machine shop in an aerospace company. And they had put in all sorts of time and effort and training and so on to be improving things. But unfortunately, the chief financial officer came by, saw what they were doing, and said, "I don't understand. Why are you doing this? We're going to shut down your department." So all that time and effort that they put into improving things was on something that wasn't really going to be required to be doing to begin with, because that entire function was going to be gone. So, and this is sorry to say, one very unfortunate and bad example of many, many other examples in terms of what is happening.
Okay.
Okay. As I said, we have broken out the different kind of changes into 4 broad categories. Level 4 basically focuses on incrementally changing business processes. So we are talking about problem-solving techniques, we are talking about Lean Six Sigma techniques, and the like. 360 feedback and executive coaching and management training to some extent fall in this category as well. I need to emphasize here that Lean Six Sigma and those similar techniques are vitally important for an organization to do. I have helped implement them. And you can be getting rather dramatic results as a consequence to doing it. But that unfortunately, is that they simply can be misapplied. I do wish, however, to give a good example that I remember that we were involved with one particular process improvement team. And again, this was in an aerospace company. And as some of you might know, that titanium is a very expensive and hard metal to be dealing with. And what you really want to do is minimize the kind of scrap that's produced when you manufacture things with titanium. This process improvement team focused on that scrap issue, ways to reduce the scrap issue, ways of improving in terms of how it was purchased and the like. And as a result of their efforts, over $250,000 per year were saved as a consequence of their process improvement efforts. So properly applied, really speaking, Six Sigma and similar techniques can be quite useful. Level 3 techniques, on the other hand, really start talking about fundamental change of business processes. And that, for example, would be a restructuring, changing from a functional organization to a customer-focused organization would be one. Another particular example would be putting in an enterprise resource planning tool, such as SAP or Bond or some other kind of enterprise-wide system for managing all of your processes. Also, that, apologies for that moving on automatically, is that, but that's the level 3 techniques. Level 2 techniques, on the other hand, really have to do what would normally be called strategic planning. And that is that strategic planning has to do with looking at one's mission, refining and defining that, defining your core competencies, and making implementation plans to be taking advantage of those core competencies and reducing or eliminating those businesses that don't really take advantage of your core competencies. So level 2 could very easily be described as strategic planning. Level 1 techniques, on the other hand, really have to do with anticipating and changing the future. And that in that particular case, when you're doing about that, you're looking at what actually might happen if something sudden actually occurred during the event. COVID-19 certainly would be one example. When we have worked with Middle Eastern organizations in scenario planning, that what we have focused on in part is looking out 10 to 15 years ahead, looking at things about changes in the price of oil, changes in the military stance of Iran, dealing with social unrest and the like, and coming up with alternative scenarios about what might occur. And then based upon those alternative scenarios, what might be signposts and indicators to tell us one particular scenario is going to be coming about instead of another. And the advantage to this is that oftentimes when organizations do strategic planning, they make one very fundamental error. And that is they assume the future is going to be like the past and that the trends that have been occurring in the past will continue into the future. One must realize that there may need to be very qualitative kind of changes in the future to what's occurring. And that's where the scenario planning comes in. And that way you can at least be partly prepared for various surprises that happened, such as COVID-19. But these are the different kind of levels of organizations in terms of what would need to be done. Level 4, level 3, level 2, and level 1. Okay. So I'm going to stop here again, and then please ask whatever questions you'd like.
Situation, and we are aware that specific industries are affected. So do you think that we could categorize the organizations on the 4 types, saying that for this industry, this level 4 will be appropriate, or level 3 will be appropriate, and so on. So can we apply different industries on different levels?
Very, very much so. I mean, for example, is that if you were in the tourism industry, certainly the last few months has just been devastating, in terms of restaurants, flights, logistics issues around that, people going to restaurants and so forth and so on. I mean, that particular industry has just been devastated all over the place. Other particular kind of industries may have had to change. And that is, I'll give an example of a San Diego company, is that the company is called Medtronic. And I was at a presentation by their CEO about 2 weeks ago. And in that particular case, Medtronic, among other things, makes devices that help you sleep better. So they're basically what are called CPAP masks. So basically it's the masks that where you put over your face overnight so you can sleep that way without snoring and the like. And they really speaking only really had a very small market, if any, for ventilators. However, is that because of COVID-19 and because they had already developed scenarios as far as what actually might be occurring, they were actually prepared for a COVID-19 pandemic. They didn't know specifically it was going to be COVID-19, but one of the things they anticipated is that. And in response to that, they radically changed in terms of what particular kind of things were being produced. They went away from making what are called CPAP machines to ventilators. And what was only 9% of their market actually became 40% of their market. So they were able to actually take advantage, right, of this situation and make money, but also provided quite a valuable service to all those people who needed ventilators. Other particular industries are less affected, and that certainly is the case in terms of things like defense, for example, and the like. If you're talking about hospitals, they certainly were affected in one sense, but they certainly got a whole lot more customers if you want to be looking at it this way. Sometimes, though, that if a certain scenario comes about, it's not clear it's an advantage to a company. And I'll give you an example in regards to hospitals. So in the United States is that obviously there have been a large influx of people coming into hospital due to COVID-19 that had not been there before. So you would think that for hospitals, this would be a good thing in the long run, profit-wise. Unfortunately, that was not the case. The reason for that was because people were so afraid to go into the hospital for non-essential services, for elective surgeries. That's where they make their money. And so of all things, so many hospitals in the United States, even though they're full, are not making money because the for-profit things that they used to be making beforehand, they can't do for a while. So you would think it would be an advantage to them profit-wise. It turns out actually it was not. Okay. Other questions from Mohammed or other people? No. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so let me talk about another particular kind of question so on here, and that's what we call the equation for success. One of the things that once you make your decisions in regards to what techniques you're going to be using, that is that the level 1, level 2, and level 3, 4 techniques, you also need to be thinking about in terms of what you need to be doing for proper implementation. And proper implementation is obviously almost more important than the right decision to be made, because a so-so decision that's made, but you implement it effectively, is ultimately going to be more effective for your organization than making the right decision and not implementing anything at all. And on that basis, we've come up with, if you will, a formula, what we call the equation for success. And that is looking at these particular factors that, if done in coordination, will significantly increase the chances for you accomplishing what you want to accomplish. And these are actually having several different components to it. Is that, first of all, for one, are you measuring the right thing? Are you actually supposed to be, are you there to decide in terms of what you actually want to be accomplishing or not? And as someone once said, what gets measured gets improved. And as a consequence to that, measurement is a very vital portion in terms of what you actually achieve. You're making sure that not only you come up with proper dashboards so that people have access to the information that they need to be making good decisions, but they're also presented with the right kind of information to be focusing on the right kind of metrics. The second particular kind of aspect to it is the technique. In other words, are you using the proper level 1, 2, 3, and 4 techniques to be properly getting at to what you want to be doing? Again, you don't want to use a tank to cut the grass, and you don't want to be using scissors to knock down a wall. So focusing on the right set of techniques is going to be vitally important in terms of making sure something is successful. The third particular portion is alignment. And alignment is something that I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. But that alignment is making sure that the vision for the company, the organizational structure for the company, the mission for the company, the behaviors of the people, the systems involved are really all properly aligned to what you ultimately want to be achieving. The next particular factor is control. And that with control is, I've seen a number of different organizations that what they've done, they says, oh, good, is that we need to be doing step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 4 without a thorough looking at whether they actually can accomplish that. Do they have the right amount of consensus in the organization to accomplish that kind of aspect? Do they actually have the proper authority and responsibility to be able to achieve that? So looking at the amount of control necessary in terms of achieving these kind of things is also very important. Next, you also need to be looking at what we call focused persistence. And that's just a fancy word for good project management. That is that you have a project plan. Are there specific tasks involved? Is it properly resourced? Is it properly scheduled? Are things tracked? Are things going to be improved? So on and so on and so on. So good project management is something that is just absolutely critical to this. When we have helped organizations implement various kind of change management techniques, that what we've just talked about, is that we make them put things into a Gantt chart and actually start tracking those tasks, so to keep their feet in the fire, so to speak, and to be making sure that everyone knows what has to be done and how it has to be done. The last particular portion of the equation has to do with consensus. And that is about how much agreement do you have among the power brokers in your organization, and the people as a whole agree on what needs to be done. And there has been so much literature and so many articles and books and so on this consensus building exercise. And it is absolutely and vitally important, but it's one of those situations where it's necessary, but it's insufficient. And that's one of the things what I'd like you to look at this particular kind of equation, because realizing that there's a multiplication sign between each of these different components. And if you think about it, if you multiply anything times 0, the result is going to be 0. So if you don't have a good measurement system, it's not really going to be making a difference about what other good things you've done in regards to the rest of the equation. If you have really good project management, but you don't have any consensus at all, that's also another 0, and the result of the equation will be 0. The other particular portion that's also important to realize when you do multiplying is that obviously, since no change effort is perfect, one can kind of compensate for the other. So that if your measurement is good but not great, you might be able to make up for it by using the right techniques, making sure everyone is aligned, making sure that the right techniques here that we're talking about, level 1, 2, 3, and 4, are used, and that you have consensus as far as what you want to do. So as I said, one factor can kind of compensate for the other, but you have to have at least some aspect of this that is going to be necessary for all different parts. Okay, comments and questions?
Yes, very easy to have this equation with a number of multiplications, okay? But in order to ask yourself for a specific factor like measurement, okay, how can we assess our organization that the measurement at that level, so we deserve number 9, let's say, okay? Very challenging question. In order just to answer this question, what are the factors we need to measure in order to say this is our maturity level, let's say, for measurement, and so on for other factors. This is one thing. The other thing that related to these number of factors, let's say they are, I think, 5 or 6, okay? The weighing for each one are different from organization to another. They are not the same. So you mentioned that. You mentioned that one can compensate the other. So for a particular organization that this factor is higher than the other factor. Yes, I agree with you that if the number is zero for a specific factor, so the success will be zero. But the challenge here now regarding the assessment tool that I could use in order to say that in alignment I deserve this amount of number, okay? And the other challenging question, how could I do the improvement in order to have another higher value in the next period?
Yeah, those are all good questions, all the good questions. So in regards to, let me give you three answers, if you will, and you can choose which one might suit you. Is that one answer is that an organization must be asking the questions themselves. And simply just by asking the questions, are we measuring the right things? Are we using the right techniques? Are these things, particularly all aspects of what we're doing, aligned? Do we properly have control? Do we have good project management? And do we have consensus? Simply by asking those questions and putting in a fair amount of time and thought into that will bring you so much higher compared to other organizations. That in itself is going to be considered a success. So simply just going through the process of asking the questions is going to be a very good exercise in terms of any kind of organizational change effort. In regards to perhaps a more objective kind of way of looking at that, not in substitution for what I said, but in addition to that, is to be looking at what other organizations are doing. In other words, is that if you think that you have a really good management system, or measurement system, I'm sorry, if you have a really good measurement system, and then you look at what other companies in your industry are doing, you look at what other companies are doing in other locations, and then you'll get a sense of comparison when you do that benchmarking to kind of say, hey, you know what? We really have a really good measurement system in place compared to everybody else, and we can really be using that. I was talking with one particular client actually a couple days ago, and they were basically going to try to be certifying their suppliers in regards to their logistics efforts. And I was looking at the project plan, and I said, I don't understand something. You said you're going to be collecting performance data from these suppliers. And they said, yes. And I said, shouldn't you be getting that supplier information and performance from the customers? Because it doesn't make a difference what self-report the suppliers are producing. What counts is what the customer is perceiving. And so on that aspect to it, they probably should be changing their measurement system accordingly. And actually the same is true actually for all of these particular kind of ones as well. It's one, ask yourself these systematic kind of questions about, are these things really being addressed? Secondly, is there some kind of benchmarking you might be able to do in comparison? And thirdly, whether you're improving or not, any kind of organizational improvement, any kind of organizational change effort can be subject to improvement. And so the first time you go through this, you're going to be coming up with maybe some things at this level. But on the other hand, is that as you get better and better and better, you are going to be improving relative to yourself. And so you're talking about a relative improvement compared to what you were before as a way of kind of comparing yourself to what actually might be possible. So three answers to your question, Mohandas Mohammed.
Thank you.
The other, yeah, most welcome, Afwan. And the other particular portion that what we talked about, I think that needs a little bit more elaboration is the alignment piece. And oftentimes, management consultants, what they do when they talk about alignment is they talk about the words and actions of senior management being consistent with the words and actions of a line employee. And that is absolutely vital as far as that's concerned, that they are using the same language and using an American expression that they are walking the talk. Alignment really means that. It also means much more than that. And so really speaking is that you need to be having all these kind of things that really need to be aligned together. is that your business situation and goals needs to be consistent with and aligned with your organizational change effort. Those need to be aligned with your organizational systems, such as structure, IT, work processes, selection, training, and management development, and the like. And all of those aspects need to be consistent with what plan of action you have. And all these particular kind of aspects really need to be worked together and coordinated together. And when these are more aligned together, the more chances of success you're actually going to be accomplishing. And so, to give an example, is that we were working with a large electronics company, I can't say who it was, that they were really trying to push openness and honesty and good transparency between management and employees. And when we did our employee survey for this company, there was an exception to that. And that there was one particular manager and his employee survey results were not very good. This was not in the US, this is an international company. And that as a result of that, we were presenting the data, and he happened to be in the audience when we were presenting that data for his organization. And he was not very happy with that. But that's indeed what his employees were saying, is that they changed directions a whole lot, that he was really just trying to be marketing himself rather than helping employees accomplish their goals, and didn't really seem to be aligned very well with the company vision. In that particular case, that particular employee was forced to leave. He basically was fired. And so that's an example of that kind of alignment that was happened between the values and the business situation on the one hand, and the actual management behavior of an individual as on the other. That's just one particular kind of example of alignment. And another particular kind of example is that we were working with a French-American company, and that we had coincidentally also been doing an employee survey with them. This was about 5,000 people in 4 languages. And it turns out that the CEO was a very controlling person and did not give any kind of leeway to even his senior vice presidents, even to spend even just a little bit of money. And this kind of came out in the discussions and in the interviews and the employee surveys. And as a result of that, he was fired. So the CEO was forced to leave because he wasn't being consistent with what the organization wanted to do. Okay. So, comments and questions, please.
Okay, for many organizations, they believe that they are aligned, or many schools in management, they interpret the alignment differently. Okay, but I want to hear from you that since in the beginning that we need to have mission, vision, and values, that we need to interpret these 3 terms, that we are able to interpret the vision to a number of strategic objectives. We need to interpret the mission with what we do in product service provision. We need to interpret the value to a culture within the organization. Since we are able to interpret these terms, so all the time we need to make sure that we are aligned. Okay, but since we have these 3 statements in a way that's separate from what we do daily, so we will not be aligned with whatever we agreed upon in the beginning as 3 statements. What do you think?
Sure. Yeah, and I have to agree. Couple different comments is that, one, I am not a great fan of developing vision statements. And the reason I say that is because what people mean by vision statements often get confused with the company mission. And a vision is actually not a company vision. It really is a vision of the future. And I think a much better approach to be used in that circumstance really has to do more with the alignment between, I'm sorry, not the alignment, is that with the scenarios themselves. So all a vision to me is an ideal scenario if everything goes perfectly. And when you do scenario development and incorporation to strategic planning, you also look at things that are when things are not going to be happening very well and not happening very well at all. And as a result of that, what do you need to be doing to compensate and get around those kind of issues? So I'm not in favor of actually developing a vision statement in that particular case. But in regards to values, the problem with values is that it is all too easy to come up with a statement of values. It is also the case where they tend to all be the same from company to company to company. And so I'm not sure the usefulness of developing a statement of values. What I really do think is valuable, though, is for management to be coming up with specific behaviors as far as how they interpret those values. So in other words, is that when they talk about transparency, for example, is that as a result, so that's really nice, what does being transparent mean? So in that case, maybe what they said for senior management, what that means is that it means providing a report to all employees every quarter in regards to their financial performance. So in other words, to say transparent, everybody can say, yeah, we're transparent. But senior management needs to come up with the specific behaviors so that a senior manager can exemplify those behaviors and it's clear about what is meant by that particular value. Okay, so I mean, those are, and lots of time and effort management consultants have been used into doing that, but I think that those really have to be done carefully. Because if you come up with a set of values where they're not specific, really behaviorally specific, what you end up doing is giving an excuse to just about everybody to say we're not living up to our values because it's unclear about what actually they're talking about. And the elements must be present. We already, to some extent, already spoke about that. The one thing that what we did not talk about, and I almost hesitated to be putting in this slide, is our change process. And the reason I hesitated was because this is a complex thing really all by itself. But this is the structure, this is the model that we use when we go into organizations to help them deal with these issues. First of all, for one, is that like with any planning effort, it's good to be coming up with framework questions. In other words, those basic kind of questions about, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Who needs to be involved? So on and so on. After senior management does an assessment, then you can then decide in terms of what kind of level of change is going to be necessary. And then you can be coming up with your goals, your strategies and methods, your measurement system, and then your implementation plan. So this is a very broad brush way of approaching this, taking into account the kind and focus in terms of what your organizational change effort should be. So I know that's throwing a lot at you in a very short period of time, and I know we only have about 15 minutes, but I would welcome your questions. This is my last slide, so this will be your last chance, if you will, to be asking questions in this regard.
Here regarding this complicated chart, but the question related to the consultation service. How do you think that the consultation service can be provided remotely? How you usually do it, or since we are in this situation, I mean COVID-19 situation, that how you could deliver a consultation service remotely? That's a organizations in Middle East.
Yeah, and that's a good question. Is that There has been, I would call a cultural tendency, I suspect, in the Middle East that has been going on for a very long time, is that people want to see you in person, want to see you face to face, and want to see your face very, very closely. And I can understand that, and that's the reason why I've gone over 20 times, in essence, over since 1993, in that particular regard. However, this really can be done almost entirely remotely. Is that the interviews can be done remotely, surveys can be done remotely, discussions can be done remotely, training can be done remotely, all in a very collaborative kind of way. Using these interactive technologies, it's really not necessary for this to be a one-way kind of communication. What we do is we use Zoom, for example. We have breakout rooms. We have all sorts of different kind of aspects in terms of what needs to be done in that regard. In addition to that, what we actually have is we actually have software that is designed for this kind of aspect. We call it Consensus Builder. And this allows us to be working with people in conjunction with video conferencing systems such as Zoom or StreamYard that allow us to be interacting with people, collecting data with people. People see the same data, and they can go through a decision and problem-solving process step by step by step. Again, ideally, it really should be done in person, but in this kind of circumstance, it can be done remotely as well. Hopefully this remote situation is not going to be necessary for years to come. That I don't know, but I suspect is that certainly over the next several months, 6 months or so, it's going to be either purely remotely or a combination of mostly remote with just occasional trips kind of back and forth at critical times. We were working with one Saudi client actually a number of years ago, and that the process that we used in that one was where we came over there for a week. We worked with them for a week. The board of directors and the managing director had to be working together, come up with certain decisions. They did that, and we communicated with them remotely. We then came back a month later and then worked with them in person, came up with their next set of decisions. They then had to come up with actions before the next time occurred. And so we went back and forth 4 times, right? But they all had actions to accomplish within that period of time, and we were also in communication with them in that period of time. So in the short run, this can be done purely remotely. In the longer run, to my mind, it's going to be done a combination of remotely and in person.
May I ask you, what's your advice for project management to overcome the COVID-19, the current situation?
I'm sorry, part of the audio dropped out there. Would you say that again, please?
Okay. What's your advice for project manager to overcome COVID-19 for the time being?
As far as project management is concerned, that's a good question. I think that really is a combination of 2 things. Is that I think that they need to become deeply competent in the collaboration tools that are out there. I think that in part it involves such things as Zoom, what we use, or some other technique. Actually, they can be used in much different ways than what they have been used with before. For example, is that Zoom has breakout rooms you can be doing. You have common whiteboards that can be used. You can be sharing screens and so on and the like. I think that's the delivery techniques as far as that's concerned. The second kind of thing is that there are any number of collaboration techniques that what can be used. Is that, just as an example, is that Microsoft Project has its online version, and that when you actually use that, you have common data files that can be used across multiple people, and they never actually have to communicate with each other. So a combination of Microsoft Project Online, Zoom, and Microsoft Teams, for example, would be a very good combination to be working on a project remotely together.
Since you have
many okay.
Yeah, please. Since you have something called the consensus building and you run a training based on that, do you think that you still are able to run this course remotely? I mean, consensus building. Can you give us brief about what do you mean by consensus building and how you could run it remotely?
Sure. And the software that what we had developed is called Consensus Builder. And that if you really want to know, there are videos and articles on it and on our website at organizedchange.com. And you can be taking a look at that. And so what it allows people to do, it allows people to be interactive on a SharePoint site. Consensus Builder is actually an application inside SharePoint. And so what people can do, they can type in their own opinions and then go through and then see each other's opinions, go through that, agree and disagree, and hopefully come to an agreement on what should be done on one step. They can then be doing criteria rating to be evaluating the opportunities that come up before them. And they see graphs and charts in regards to how people have answered those kind of questions. They can then go to Zoom. They can then argue and discuss in terms of what the situation is and decide on those process. And the data that they generate kind of goes all the way down to something that can be imported in a Microsoft project. And that, yes, again, ideally it can be done. It should be done in person. It does not need to be. Does not need to be done at all. It was specifically designed to be allowing for remote input. Other comments and questions? Ashraf, I think you had one too.
Actually, we have our first webinar was about the best working from home tools. We discussed many tools, including project management like Slack and Microsoft Teams, as you mentioned. But actually, I have concern for Zoom regarding to the security issue discovered later. So, and also it's a limited number of attendees, depending on the package you are paying for. So this is what I want to mention, actually.
Right, that's a good one. As far as the security issues are concerned, in regards to Zoom, it really was a function just in terms of how people were using it, rather than Zoom itself. And that Zoom has changed the defaults. So the main issue is actually people barging into meetings, and that where they were not really allowed to be in, that really was a major entrance point. It was not a hack in Zoom per se. It actually was the people just coming into meetings that they shouldn't have gone into. And the way that Zoom has set that up now with the randomly created meeting IDs and 256-bit encryption passwords, is that kind of thing would be very, very difficult to do now. And so that particular portion, I'm not really concerned about that. In regards to cost, it is a function, but the nice part about Zoom is that it's not, you don't have to keep the cost for long. So for example, I was speaking about 3 weeks ago to another organization, and that they were going to be having more people than what was going to be allowed under their license. And that we just said, well, just go ahead and increase it. And we allowed up to 500 participants. And since it was only for a fraction of the month, it cost us $23. And that's it. So you can turn off and on that increased capability on a month-by-month basis. So when you have a big group of people, you expand it. When you don't have a big group of people, you just don't pay for it for that month. So it's a really easy, easy kind of thing to scale up and down as how you might need.
Okay, thank you. So you're recommending Zoom for webinars and interactivity?
I do, and the reason for that is because you actually can be, for example, you actually can be having, if you really want to, hundreds of participants with interactive video. And you also can be having breakout rooms in addition to that. And you also have polling features, and you also have collaboration features there as well. And the other thing too with Zoom, better than most others, not entirely so, but better than most others, the interface is a little bit simpler to use. And I've used about 4 different kinds or whatever, and Zoom is a little bit easier to play around with in terms of what you want to be achieving.
I agree with you, actually, regarding it's the simplest one to be used, and it's user-friendly. It has all facilities, whiteboard, you can share, you can separate people in different rooms, as you mentioned.
Very, very much so. Very, very much so. Well, we only have just a couple minutes left. Was there anything else that I could be helping you with? You yourselves and the audience? Okay. In that particular case, I wanted to thank you. Thank you for taking your own precious time to be hearing me. I would very much look forward to any other comments and questions that what you might have. And given the audience is mostly here from the Middle East, just to let you know that our website is mostly in English, but there is also an Arabic section. And there also are articles and videos in Arabic as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And we hope to meet you soon after this COVID crisis and meet face to face in Egypt and Saudi Arabia, and welcome you, inshallah, very soon.
I appreciate that. Shukran. Thank you so much. And just to let you know, is the Mohammed owes me pizza now. I'm coming to get the pizza, Mohammed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Shukran. Ma-salam.
Ma-salama. And I would like to mention that, I will say it in Arabic and in English, this actually our last webinar for Ramadan. We started during Ramadan, and we started almost 10 sessions. The first session was the best work from home tools by myself. We repeated 4 times. One of them was in using Zoom and Live Storm. Also, the second one was how not to fire your employees by Mohammed Al-Arabi. Also, the third one, sports technology by Syed Farouk. Also, fourth one, innovation is the way out. And Mohammed also, we mentioned one, Mohammed, governance and the strategy execution. And one, a COVID investment opportunities. Also, we mentioned also a best online meeting solutions. We discuss what we mentioned now, all online available meeting solutions. And a couple of days ago, operational excellence in the time of crisis with Henry Kuleki. And also our last one now is treating our organization as a system by yourself. To know more about our upcoming workshops and training and seminars, you're most welcome to visit our website. And once again, I would like to thank you very much, David and Mohammed, and hope to meet you soon, inshallah. And thank you very much also for your time and for being with us. And this video will be available in our digital channels for the site. And inshallah, we'll discuss how to make workshops, online workshops together, inshallah. Thank you and have a good day.
Very good.
Shukran, Mohammed. Thank you very much.
مع السلامة.
Okay, thank you. مع السلامة. أشوفكم على خير وكل سنة وحضراتكم طيبين. Have a good day.